it's always with any Twitter trend, the first 20 results that you get would be from the woke left. And you would just immediately know, okay, if I take this view, I will be one of the baddies. If I take that view, I'll be on the popular side. So you no longer have that interim period where you can just for yourself think about something and quietly maybe come to your own conclusion.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends and comrades, my name is Harrison Griffiths. I'm Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And joining me today is the IEA's Head of Political Economy, Kristian Niemietz, who has written in the last week in 1828 about how and why he thinks liberals have lost the internet. So, Kristian, your argument is that we have lost it. It's a pretty sort of gloomy picture of the state of social media at the moment.
Well, that's what I do.
How have we lost it? Who have we lost it to, and why does it matter?
Well, I mean, the starting point for this was that for some reason I was thinking back about the early days of the internet, because I'm an old man. I remember a time when there was no internet and what it was like when it was still relatively new. And a lot of people on our side at the time had this idea that this is going to be a great boon for us because, well, in a lot of ways, the internet took out the middleman. There were a lot of goods and services that prior to the internet, in the before times, you could only access through specialized intermediaries. There was, for example, if you wanted to book a foreign holiday, you would have to go and do that through a travel agent, because otherwise, how would you know anything about hotels in Spain? Things like user-generated content wasn't really a thing. It would be, now you get self-published authors who write something, convert it into Kindle format, upload it on Amazon without a professional publisher involved. And the same is true for musicians, bloggers, all kinds of people who create content and just put it on a platform where you can access it directly. And this means that these middlemen, these professional specialized intermediaries who used to be gatekeepers, have lost the position as gatekeepers that they once held. You can bypass the gatekeepers, whereas previously, if somebody didn't make it past the gatekeeper, you would probably never know what they were going to offer you. And the same, you could say, is in principle true in the sphere of political ideas. That there used to be gatekeepers of ideas, political parties especially, perhaps university societies, the established media, whatever the forum is that you use to access ideas. There were gatekeepers. If you didn't make it past them, more exotic, non-mainstream ideas, if they didn't make it past the gatekeepers, you would just not know about their existence. And that's why there was this idea that non-mainstream ideologies, libertarianism being one of them, would benefit from the internet. That this would mean that the established mainstream ideologies, especially the culturally dominant left, and perhaps to a lesser extent mainstream conservatism, would lose some of their grip on public debate, and that you would get a more pluralistic landscape. It wouldn't mean that you would now get a libertarian republic or something, but just that rather than having this large hegemonic left-wing bloc and a few fringe voices, you might get a more dispersed market structure or a more pluralistic landscape of ideas, where you have all kinds of ideas, having a small to medium-sized following, rather than there being one or two big blocks. That was the idea, and then it didn't happen.
Yeah, and you can understand from my perspective, I was very young when the internet and social media was taking off proper. Looking from my view and how I've experienced social media in my sort of teenage years and in my 20s, what happened? Because that's not how it's played out.
No, that's true. The problem with the current, with social media as it is at the moment, is that, well, as you know, there's just this huge pressure to conform. There's massive group conformity. It's Twitter in particular is a hyper-conformist medium, where there's just so much content from people who clearly try to elicit a positive response. People say things because they know this is going to go down well. So especially anti-capitalist cliches. Somebody puts out an anti-capitalist cliche. It doesn't add any information, even if you, and never mind that we obviously don't agree with it, but it's often the sort of thing where I think, even if I did agree with it, I would still think, come on, this is a bit lame. But this is most Twitter content. People say things because they want to appeal to an audience. They're begging for applause, basically. And this is what's happened. This hyperconformism, this applause begging, that's something that in the early days of the internet, the predecessors of social media, that didn't really exist, because the old discussion forums that I remember, before Twitter was founded, before social media in the current form was set up, those were forums where you could post opinions, but you would have no idea of knowing whether what you said was popular or not. So I remember a libertarian forum on which I used to post for maybe 5 years or so, semi-regularly. Even after such a long time, even after 5 years, I could honestly not tell you whether what I said was popular on that forum, whether they all thought, wow, finally somebody says it, or whether they all thought, oh God, Niemietz, that moron again. Could be either of those, could be somewhere in between. You wouldn't know. You had no direct feedback mechanism. You wouldn't know whether what you said was popular or not. And that meant that there was much less of an incentive to pander to an audience, because that only makes sense when you get the direct feedback from the audience, when you get the audience cheering you on, saying, brilliant, this is it, totally agree. When there's no means of doing that, then you just won't bother doing it in the first place.
And this is where the mechanics of modern social media really comes into play. I think Jonathan Haidt described the like function on Facebook as like giving a weapon to a 4-year-old. In what way has that feedback mechanism developed to really shape opinion? Like, surely without those feedback mechanisms, people would still believe what they believed. What exactly about Twitter and Facebook's feedback mechanism has in your view, made the outlook so grim for those of us who aren't mainstream normie lefties?
Yeah, I've long had the theory that political beliefs are mostly autosuggestive, that you can talk yourself into believing something that you want to believe. And what I mean by that is, let's use the following analogy. You've probably heard the criticism is often made of people who enjoy high culture and who like to brag about that. They will often be accused, somebody will say, well, you don't really enjoy this, do you? You just want to show how sophisticated you are.
Caveat.
I think that's not really how it works. It's not that the people who go to art galleries or operas, it's not that they sit there and secretly think, oh God, I hate this, it's so boring, I'd rather be at a Britney Spears concert. It's more that you may be initially drawn to it because it signals something about who you are and you want to send that kind of signal. You're drawn to it because you know that that's the kind of social image that you want to project. That may be the initial motivation, but then once you're there, you can, if you start with that positive attitude, you can tell yourself that you actually enjoy it, and then it becomes real over time. Now, this won't work for everyone. If you just really hate the opera, if you think it's boring as hell, then no amount of self-persuasion is going to work. And in the same way with political opinions, let's say if you are already a libertarian, no amount of observing how many likes and retweets people get for saying communist things or saying coercive woke things. None of that is going to persuade you because you already have your opinion. But what I've seen, I'm not going to name anyone here, but I could name quite a few journalists, commentators, academics, and you can probably guess who I'm talking about, who I would previously have thought of as reasonable people. I disagree with them on a lot, but I'd say, well, they talk about fact-based things. They make what we usually call wrong within the normal range, within the normal parameters. who, since they signed onto Twitter, became more rapidly crowd-pleasingly left-wing. So not just center-left, but going full Corbynite, full woke. And that surely is that mechanism, that they just put several opinions out there, some of the more reasonable ones and some of the more overtly socialist, overtly woke ones. And they just notice when I say something pro-Corbyn, when I say something anti-capitalist, I get hundreds and thousands of likes and retweets. When I just make an empirical point, I get 2 sympathy likes. Now, if
one of them's usually from me.
Well, precisely, the other one would be from me.
Yeah.
And if you have a strong commitment to the truth or to those interests and ideas, that's not going to trouble you very much. You will still say, okay, even if nobody wants to hear this, this is still right, and I'll say it. But if you have a variety of motives and you just note, and you also want to be popular, you also want to be on the fashionable side of the argument, then that's the sort of thing. You're a bit on the fence. You notice this is where I get the positive feedback, this is where I don't. You're just naturally drawn towards the positive feedback opinions.
And when the internet sort of began really starting up and presented these avenues for connecting people who might otherwise have not been connected, reducing those barriers to entry, as you described at the beginning of our conversation, there was this hope that people who had these views but who maybe were geographically distant, for example, could come together and find a sort of common forum, even though it's pretty much undoubted that in most circles of social media, the left at least tacitly dominates the discussion. That has come to some kind of fruition. You're talking about libertarian forums, you have a fair number of followers on Twitter. There are so many things I would never have read from the libertarian side, or people who I would never have encountered from the libertarian and liberal side without social media. There are these communities of people who don't have those high status opinions, libertarians, liberals, conservatives, low status lefties like tankies. They find themselves groups where they can talk to each other and have a conversation and have internal feedback mechanisms. It's not all bad, is it? There is a wide range of views that you can find if you look. Yes.
First, going back to the original point, the reason why we got it wrong in the early 2000s, talking about the early discussion forums, or not so early anymore, but the wave that I experienced, we concentrated on the search cost. We thought that was the reason why you had so few libertarians or maybe other non-mainstream beliefs. We thought the search cost was just too high. The effort you'd have to make to find out about those beliefs was too high. And if you decrease the cost of doing something, whatever that is, people will do more of it, unless demand is already saturated. So that part was true, and that for some people that is still true. That's the reason why, as you said, for you it was easier to come across those beliefs than it would have been if you had been a member of an earlier generation. That's all true, but it also heightened the social cost of exploring those ideas and not conforming with the mainstream fashionable beliefs. And I'd say this second effect dominates the first one. It crowds out the first one. It's a stronger effect. In the 80s, it would have been maybe quite unlikely for you to come across writings by Milton Friedman or so, or well, maybe slightly more in the English-speaking world. But I remember, well, for me, when I first heard about it, it was even hard to find translations of it, and it was outside of the English-speaking world. This was all even harder. And that has all changed, and it's made a difference for some people. It's just that the pressure to conform has also become a lot stronger. If you had, against the odds, found out about those exotic beliefs, even though the chance of discovering that weren't high, once you had found them, you could at least have explored them in your own time. And you wouldn't immediately think, how are people going to judge me if I say something positive about this? You would have read about it, thought about it, and now the process of forming opinions has become much more of a social process. So if you think about this event from this minor scandal from last week, there was this can't remember what exactly she was, someone connected to the royal family, who asked a black person, where are you from? And wouldn't take, I'm from Hackney, for an answer, but kept pushing, yeah, but where are you really from, and all that. If this had been something like that had happened before the internet or early days of internet, you would, and if you had heard about it at all, you would first of all have heard about this on your own. You would have had some time to think about, what do I actually make of this? Do I think this is a problem, or do I think this is overblown? Do I think the critics are right? You would not immediately know what everyone else thinks about it. You'd have some time to think about this on your own, and then you would try it out. Then maybe you would talk about it with a flatmate or in a small circle. And whereas now, you read about it on Twitter, you immediately know. You click on the trend and you get the first 20 opinions, and it's always, with any Twitter trend, the first 20 results that you get would be from the woke left. And you would just immediately know, okay, if I take this view, I will be one of the baddies. If I take that view, I'll be on the popular side. So you no longer have that interim period where you can just, for yourself, think about something and quietly maybe come to your own conclusion.
And in terms of the political implications of all this, we've seen in Europe and the United States and really around the world, definitely an upsurge institutionally and politically in terms, in the direction of sort of wokeism and normie mentality, and this sort of cluster effect around the same sort of viewpoints, the acceptable viewpoints, viewpoints that don't get challenged in mainstream debate. But that's not all we've seen in the period where sites like Twitter have really taken off and become the centre of political discourse for so many. We have also seen, at that same time, a rise of a reactionary force against that, in the form of, say, Trumpism, or even, you know, what Brexit has come to look like in the UK. People who aren't woke, people who aren't very high status in their views, people who don't conform to these acceptable standards that come out of Twitter. Is it really sort of all doom and gloom going forward? I mean, I'm not a fan of the reactionary side either, and I don't think you are. But yeah, has it really had that much of an effect on politics more broadly that you can look as a political historian and say it's as one-sided as it might look if you spent a few hours on Twitter in the real world?
Yes. Okay. When I say Twitter is very woke, socialist, left-dominated, maybe I need to make some qualifications there. You can gain quite a sizable following also by being a right-wing culture warrior. I'd say if you're on our side, a free market liberal, there's, well, I'd say the biggest account maybe that I can think of on our side would be our former colleague Kate Andrews, who has something like 70,000 followers or so.
Tyler Cowen's.
Well, okay, but that's in the American market.
Yeah, course, yes.
They can tap into a bigger market. But if you mostly comment on British issues,
yeah, absolutely.
I'd say that would be probably the upper limit. And there's only maybe 24 or so that have more than 5,000 followers is already, if you're a free market liberal with more than 5,000 followers, you are already at pretty close to the very, very top.
But does it show that there has been a reaction and there is a clear presence sort of against those normie views on Twitter, whether we like what's emerged or not, and I don't think either of us do? Does it not at least show that there might be some hope, that there might be an opportunity for us to break through and make the internet what we thought it could be in the 2000s? Or do you really think, as it looks at the moment, that there is pretty much no chance of reclaiming the internet, or at least reclaiming a sizable corner of it?
Yeah, there might be a little bit in that, on that anti-woke conservative right. I mean, they may not be liberals, or the vast majority of them would never call themselves that.
Certainly not.
But they might have some issues on which, I think a lot of them are just not that interested in economics. So therefore, if you share some of their views on culture war issues, even if it's not quite for the same reason, but if you also are against coercive wokery, And it could be that you can then influence them because then they see you as an ally and they accept some of your positions on economics, even if it's not their main priority. So yeah, there might be some ways of entering, appealing to people in other bubbles. But I'd say nonetheless, I don't see how free market liberal Twitter could ever be vaguely comparable to woke socialist Twitter, where I said on our side 70,000 seems to be pretty much the upper limit, and even there's only one person that I could think of. If you compare that to woke socialist Twitter, there it's very easy if you're a woke socialist to have a 6-digit following. Owen Jones has over 1 million followers. Corbyn has 2.5 million. So that is so yes, you can say it's not all homogeneous, it's not all the same. There are these different groups, but they're not even vaguely comparable in terms of size and activity levels. So you can say there are some medium-sized players or platforms on our side, but none of them come anywhere near what an equivalent woke socialist would be like. There, it can very easily be over 100,000 people. We can talk about millions, and that's just not something that will happen on our side.
Yes, and if that hegemony is to be challenged by someone, that sort of clear ascendancy and superiority that you described is going to be challenged by someone, there needs to be quite sort of significant change in the way that we interact with social media. So you talk about feedback mechanisms, you talk about knowing how many billions of retweets you've got for your generic left-wing take and all 3 of the likes you've got for your thread on cutting capital gains tax or something. What changes would you like to see if you had Elon Musk's ear, for example? What changes would you recommend to make Twitter an avenue for more open discussion, for a sort of a sphere where people's opinions were formed less by the feedback that they saw given to other people, and as such the pressure then put on them to conform with those opinions?
Yeah, I don't think that's something that Elon Musk can do much about, because the problem with Twitter is the users. I know I sound like Bertolt Brecht here, talking about dissolving the people and electing a new one. Whereas with Twitter users, say, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea. It is a cultural issue mostly, that you could imagine a culture of social media where pandering to your audience's prejudices is looked down upon, where that would almost be frowned upon, something that you just shouldn't do, where that's considered a bit of a faux pas. I'd say that would be the ideal, if people start to realize, hang on, you're just saying this because you want applause, right? You're just playing to the gallery here. And where ideally there would be a bit of a social stigma attached to that. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but that's just about within the boundaries of what's imaginable. And I think that would be ideal if people were almost a bit shy to say crowd-pleasing things, because that could in itself be then not crowd-pleasing if the crowd doesn't want to be flattered. There are circumstances where it would be like that. Imagine we had an event here where, and it's an IEA audience, you know that they're all very likely to be free market liberals. Imagine I'm on the panel and I just talk in generic slogans, socialism doesn't work, free markets are great. You would think, come on, this is a bit lame. You would agree, but you would still think, why am I wasting my time here? Why do I take 15 minutes out of my day to listen to things that I already know? You would expect me to either maybe even challenge the audience a bit, or if I'm not doing that, at least provide some factual information. It could be the sort of facts that fits well into their worldview, but where you would still say, okay, that's something I didn't know, and that would not be in itself something which would make the room break out in applause. And if that became a wider culture, that it's socially frowned upon to to play to the gallery, say things that are too easy. That would be ideal, and because that's the way the old forums worked. It was not just that the technology was different, because even then, even on the pre-Twitter, the discussion forums, it would have been possible to respond to previous contributions by just signaling what you make of it, by saying, great point, finally somebody says it, or absolute rubbish, take this down. It's just that didn't usually happen, because the idea was that every post, every contribution was supposed to add some information. And if you just said, I agree with this, the idea back then used to be, well, that's not much information. Okay, Joe Bloggs agrees. Yeah, that's fantastic for Joe. But what follows from that? What do I do with that information now?
Yeah.
And that should ideally be the social media culture, that you contribute because you want to say something. You have something to say.
And you don't sense that sea change is coming anytime soon. There will be no culture change cavalry to come and save us from the left-wing supremacy and dominance.
No, but there are some. There was a couple of years ago, Twitter was planning to make some changes, or floating, brainstorming ideas, and maybe they were just thinking out aloud. But one of the ideas was to hide the retweet counter. So you can still retweet things. It's just that you would have no idea of knowing whether you're the first one or whether 1 million people have done this before. And that would take away this applause, or at least greatly weaken this applause function. And that to me sounded like a great idea. I don't think it would be an absolute game changer because, well, the medium is what it is. It has the culture it has. People would still know that if you somehow come up with a new way of saying capitalism is bad, you probably get 1 million retweets, even if you can't see them. Whereas if you explain, no, actually capitalism can be quite good because it has improved this or that, you get 2 sympathy retweets. And again, even if you can't see that, the expectation is already baked in. But still, not having that direct feedback, that could be a disincentive to pure pandering, because well, if you're that type of person, you want that direct feedback, and if you don't get it, it loses its attractiveness.
Excellent. Well, Kristian, on that, we must bring this discussion to an end. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. Also, feel free to leave your views in the comments. Is left-wing domination of the internet a fact of the universe, or is there hope yet? I've been Harrison Griffiths, and as always, thank you very much for watching.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.